Please enter. You will now read.
And I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Karen McTighe-Musil, who is the Senior Director of Civic Learning and Democracy Initiatives at the Association of American Colleges and Universities. Karen?
Thank you, Verdis. And hello, everyone connected together for this Cyberspace Civic Forum. We're delighted you've joined us to tackle what is a highly contentious topic in the U.S., Europe, and around the world: immigration, race, and citizenship. From France: we don't want them. This is our home. We are not racist. We're here to support the French identity. All of these were on signs and the lips of demonstrators from Croix-Île, where some migrants were being moved from a larger holding camp in Calais. From St. Cloud, Minnesota: we want a ban on any more Somalis moving to our city. We had no say on their being placed here. This is not about race or religion. We just want our city the way it was. Were sentiments from a group of St. Cloud citizens pressing their congressman. These are just the kind of issues we need to be studying and discussing on all of our campuses. AAC&U and TDC, the co-sponsors of this webinar series, have both taken up a mantle to help colleges do just that. Founded in 1915, AAC&U, which represents 1,352 and four-year public and private colleges and universities, aims to affirm a collective commitment to liberal education and to inclusive excellence. Central to that effort is educating students for socially responsible action in today's interdependent but unequal and divided world. As you can see from the range of publications we produced over the past 2 decades, we've been doing this from many angles for a long time. The Democracy Commitment was founded just 5 years ago with laser focus on community colleges committed to the goal that all their students graduate with an education in citizenship and democracy. Since over 40% of college students in this country begin, and some end, in community colleges, TDC's leadership is extraordinarily important. We would also like to give special thanks to the National Endowment for the Humanities that funded the series, which is part of an AAC&U grant called Citizenship Under Siege. And in our AAC&U TDC grant, we worked with 7 community colleges who've used public dialogues and programs on their campuses and with their communities for the past year to tackle what feel like intractable differences. They have discovered through listening, learning, and engaging with others, you can actually move people to new spaces where common ground for the common good can be discovered. And finally, the webinar is driven by these learning outcomes, which we pass along to you as an open source. Feel free to claim any of these if it's useful in your work. Verdis?
Thanks, Karen. And before we begin, I have a few housekeeping items to share with you. I'm seeing that some people cannot hear anything, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have someone put in some of the audio conference information in the chat box so that if you cannot hear, then you can at least hear through your phone if you have that set up. Also, if you are calling in, please mute your phone. It's very, very important for you to mute your phone if you do call in by pressing *6. So everyone that has called in, if you can please be kind and press *6 now, and then we will not be interrupted and we'll have questions and answers at the end of the program, which we have reserved the last 10 minutes for. And you can ask your questions at the bottom right hand of the screen. And as you're doing right now, at the top right of the screen, feel free to chat with us. And if you are attending with more than one person with you, please tell us where you're from and how many people that you're attending this webinar with. And after the webinar, an email will be sent with a link to access the recording. By the way, this is being recorded. and resources. So please feel free to share them with your colleagues. And we will also send a link with a brief survey, and we ask that everyone, please, attending this webinar, to please fill out this brief survey, and we will definitely appreciate your feedback. And to generate as much participant engagement as possible, we have given about a few prompts, about 2 or 3 prompts to spur discussion and reflection, and then the 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. And with these prompts, we invite you to participate in where you are, but also to definitely chat us up and chat your questions if you feel inclined to share. And I just want to give a shout out to Monroe Community College. Welcome. Now, the first prompt, we invite you now to participate in the first of our 3 prompts. And the first prompt says, what 3 words or phrases come to your mind when the word immigrants is used either on your campus or in the public at large? And feel free to share this in the chat box. And while you're doing that, we'll briefly introduce the presenters for today. And you can also find out more about them on our website. First up is David Kalivas. And David is a professor of world history and the director of the Commonwealth Honors Program at Middlesex Community College in Massachusetts. And we welcome David.
Well, thank you.
Our second is Helen-Margaret Nasser, who is Associate Director of the Honors Program at CUNY Kingsborough Community College in New York City. Welcome, Helen.
And the next pair of experts come to us from, again, Middlesex Community College in Massachusetts. And it's Matthew Olson, who is the Dean of Humanities and Social Sciences, and Dona Cady, who is the Dean of Global Education. Welcome, Matthew and Dona.
And our final presenter, another David, is G. David Price, who is Professor in History at Santa Fe College in Florida. Welcome, David Price.
Thank you.
Well, let's begin with the first David, David Kalivas. You've been teaching about immigration in your history classes, both in a U.S. and context as well as a global context. And you come to this professional expertise with additional lived experience as the grandson of a Greek immigrant. Can you provide a larger frame that can help us be better at raising productive discussions about this contentious and ubiquitous issue?
Well, thank you very much. I'll do my best to provide a framework in any event for us to think about. This afternoon's session examines immigration within a broad context, from the historical to sociological to programmatic aspects, and will hopefully offer some dialogue that seems to be missing in the public arena, and especially so during this polarizing election year with its share of emotional rhetoric about immigrants and immigration. The current public discourse on immigration, or what is passing for discourse, tends toward creating an us and a them framework. We can hear clamor from rallies and AM radio talking heads that we're losing or have lost our country and need to get it back. We need to get them out, protect our territory. Remove the foreigners is the tone when discussing immigration of late. This rhetoric communicates the sense of a civilizational danger, that we are being threatened, contaminated as it were by immigrants, both legal and illegal. And this, of course, gives us an additional layer of ethnocentrism at best and racism at its worst. Whoever they are tend to look and sound different from us, whether Somalis in St. Paul, Minnesota, Mexicans in Arizona, Syrians in Connecticut, or let's travel back in time some 30-odd years ago to the Cambodians in Stockton, California, or Lowell, Mass., or go back even earlier to the 1850s into the early 20th century when immigrants came to work in the developing factory cities, the Irish, the French Canadians, Italians, the Germans, Swedes, Greeks, and the cycle continues to the present day. Each group from the last century to the present has always been greeted with suspicion, hostility, and characterized as being them, not us. We may hear lots of, we want our country back, but we are and always have been them. Others arrive and have always arrived to our communities, and then in time they become our communities. United States history has always been about immigration and immigrants becoming Americans. But we need to read and learn about that history both on a macro level and on an individual level, or that history in the multicultural society it continuously recreates will not exist in the minds of our students, our neighbors, and our community members. As you can see by the map on your screen, we have met the other, and the other is all of us. Whether they realize it or not, those who advocate building walls to keep out immigrants or deport foreigners seem to have an underlying fear of the other, of the unknown, a fear that only has potential to dissipate if there is education about the other in us and about the immigrant experience of newcomers as well as those who arrived long ago. Part of that education should be a cultural history that frames the discourse on immigration and offers a counterpoint to the xenophobic worldview. Think about this. At some point, there was a generational shift from immigrant to becoming the first American-born generation. Then these children of immigrants interacted and may have married within their ethnic groups. But many eventually married external to the immigrant community, and then their children and their grandchildren and so on continue doing the same, so that eventually the heritage of former immigrants is threaded with many cultures from many parts of the globe, so that even being a hyphenated American eventually changes. There are just too many lineages for one hyphen, and we can see many threads of immigrant cultures continue from St. Anthony Day parades, Cinco de Mayo celebrations, and a variety of cultural festivals and commemorations from a variety of ancestral homelands, where the foods of the world are proudly displayed and eaten by just about everyone. We can also see this on holidays, where along with the turkey and apple pie come the pierogies, or the guacamole, or the baklava, or a cannoli or two, or a samosa, and all kinds of tasty delights. The connection between food and culture and the way food can be an expression of ethnicity and of immigrants may be the most obvious illustration of a land of immigrants. Whether people recognize their roots and their multiple lineages, their cultural contexts, if you would, in the United States or not, it is still there. And anecdotally, perhaps we can observe this by extension in the variety of foodstuffs in our markets and in the many restaurants that serve multi-ethnic cuisines. Core to the American experience in the United States is navigating multiple ethnic identities at some point in our experiences as immigrants and later as citizens within a multicultural ancestry. Of course, the term American itself is still another issue. In the U.S., we use it to denote U.S. citizens, but American can also describe anyone from North, Central, and South America. But that's another story for another time. For this session, it would seem we are all a byproduct of immigration in the United States. We are always them, and they are always us. Scratch us, and we can see beneath the surface where we all come from someplace else at one point or another. The United States is much more a cultural mosaic and less the melting pot that Oscar Hanlon wrote about in his landmark work, The Uprooted, nearly 70 years ago. Yet, as the generations pass by, the hyphenated identities do become blurred or lost, and the United States version of an American identity emerges. The immigrant context of that identity is ever present, from our DNA to our rich multicultural traditions, festivals, and the multilingual reality of daily life in cities across the United States. No wall has kept anyone out, but at least not for too long. As we can see by this slide, China and the Great Wall, the myth of a monolithic culture is not unique to the United States. The notion that China has always had a wall to separate itself from the barbarians is as much a part of the mythology of China's national identity as the notion that somehow the U.S. has a monolithic culture that needs protecting by a Great Wall. The wall did not exist for all time in China and is, in fact, a phenomenon of the modern age built during the Ming Dynasty and did not keep out the Manchus north of China. They, the Manchus, marched through the wall and conquered China in the 17th century and, of course, ruled until the early 20th century. In fact, the last dynasty of China itself was not Chinese, it was Manchu. This is but one example, but a good one to show how walls are used in national myth-making and how porous they are, as in China's wall, which never prevented but actually had many zones of interactions at the various garrison towns along its northern frontiers. Of course, boundaries can be created by walls, but walled or not, migration patterns have been the constant of human history since the dawn of time. In fact, since the first humans started populating the world as they moved out of Africa millions of years ago. We tend to think of our cultures and languages with some emotional attachment as if they are a constant, as if they have always existed. But that is just not true. Cultures and languages are in flux. They always change and have changed due to migration. Nothing is static. As we can see with these slides on linguistic connections, what do these two slides illustrate for us? They inform us that languages such as English did not sprout from a specific or unique soil, but they migrate, move with people. For instance, English is a Germanic language, and as we can see, there are many languages with what is commonly referred to as the Indo-European family of languages, which show us how English, Greek, Russian, Armenian, Sanskrit, and many others are all related, that at one time there was a common area with common languages, and as people migrated over 4 or so thousand years ago out of Central Asia into what is today Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India, as well as into the western parts of Eurasia, that many of the languages we normally associate as being separate from one another due to their distance are actually in the same family. We know that languages and cultures share words and customs, and over time give rise to new languages and cultures. The languages and cultures of today did not exist back 1,000+ years ago. We know this. But this is not studied or expressed fully in popular culture. Otherwise, the anti-immigrant discourse might not be so vile. It is the interactions between people that have always cultivated organic developments of peoples and ways of life. Let me close with a personal story. I am the grandson of Greek immigrants who came to Lowell, Mass. During the first decade of the 20th century. And at one point, there were about 25,000 Greeks in Lowell. These immigrants came as they were seen, and they were seen as the other. They were different in many ways, from looks to the smells of their foods to the strange alphabet they used. Most have moved on, but there remains pockets in Lowell still. As I grew up, we learned a Gringlish, if you would. One example is ice creamy, which, like many other words, many of us thought as we were growing up was actually the Greek word for ice cream. Of course, like so many Gringlish words, it wasn't the correct word. In Greek, of course, ice cream is pagoto, not ice creamy. Had we not been so connected in the modern world, perhaps Gringlish, like Spanglish and so other Glinglishes, if you would have become new languages, but they didn't. In the desire to preserve cultural lineage, this Greek Orthodox Church in Lowell, an historic landmark built in 1905, an architectural miniature of Hagia Sophia, has integrated the iconic image of Apollo's temple at Delphi into a public cultural presentation that preserves an ancestral culture and bridges monotheistic and polytheistic cultures in the name of Hellenism and Hellenic identity. As the next two slides show, the celebration of Greek Independence Day at City Hall with all its festivities, and the memorial marker dedicated to the early Greek immigrants and all their hard work and sacrifices in the 2 world wars, all is a central part of the American experience as Greek immigrants transitioned from immigrant to citizen over the past 100 or so years. To say, I want my country back. Build a wall, give me my country back, ignores the value and the richness that comes along with immigrants and their contributions and the richness they bring to our values and to our lives. Thank you.
And thank you, David, for that spirited and framing of the webinar for today. And as we take a brief pause, we would like and invite you to please take a moment and write down some pertinent facts about your own family history, as David has shared, of being newcomers in the U.S., either voluntary or by involuntary ways like slavery, and whether it took time to be seen and exercise your family's full opportunities as citizens. And if of Native American ancestry, what did your family, or how did your family view the newcomers, and what shifts were there in your own family's citizenship status? And feel free to share your answers with us in the chat box at the top right of the screen. And while you are sharing with us, if you so desire, next up is Helen-Margaret Nasser from Kingsborough Community College, one of the most diverse colleges in the country, where such discussions are held every day freely, and are everyday fair, really. Helen, can you tell us more about that?
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Verdis, and thank you very much, David. Our webinar title is I Want My Country Back, but for many of our students, this perception of my country varies greatly. So I'm coming from Kingsborough Community College in Brooklyn, New York, and its student body is highly diverse, representing over 140 countries, speaking over 70+ languages, and several religions and faiths are practiced. In order to claim a stake in their country, Students must begin by grappling with the layered, hyphenated, and complicated identities that they hold. I am passionate, as I am sure we all are, about civic engagement and empowering students to find their voice to impact the change they'd like to see in their campuses, communities, and their country. As I worked to help students understand the importance of civic engagement, I found it useful to present a process of identity, agency, and advocacy as a model towards civic engagement. For civic engagement to become tangible for our students, we have to unpack at a very personal level. Who are our students? What do they care about? What skills do they possess? And how will they make changes? David and I actually have a lot in common. Although I'm not Greek, you can understand what it's like to be a first-generation Egyptian kid by watching the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding. That's a lot like my childhood, and you can also ask my non-Egyptian husband. That was a lot like our wedding. Unpacking identity is a challenge I know all too well. As a first-generation Egyptian American, I spent my childhood not knowing which world I belonged to. Not American enough to be not American enough to be American, not Egyptian enough to be Egyptian. I was left somewhere in the middle to make my own peace with this hybrid identity. It took me some time to understand that this complexity that I struggled with was in fact beautiful and rich, and I was able to embrace my place as somewhere in the middle. This quote by Najla Saeed sums it up beautifully, saying that I'd rather be all of these things than just plain old American or plain old Arab. And just 3 months ago, I gave birth to my first child, and if I thought my hyphens were complicated, as David said, too many lineages and too many hyphens, my husband is a Russian-Canadian American Egyptian, so I will be there to help him grapple with his own identity crises. Importance of identity is crucial. As Martin Luther King's quote reminds us, this awareness of one's somebodyness is a crucial first step for civic action. Asking your students what they are willing to fight for, to defend, to protect, or to build can be a loaded question. This is how civic learning can begin to be more tangible and can become more effective in our classrooms. Once identity is established, students can move towards agency. From this, a student can see what is important to them and what skills they already possess and the allies they will need to impact change. We need to stress upon our students that democracy is not a spectator sport, and we can no longer place blame on others for what hasn't been done or to rely on others to make the changes we seek. By having students engage with their own identities, they understand what matters to them. I often introduce them to the example of the Arab Spring, particularly in Egypt, to illustrate the power of agency. Agency happens when things become personal, when the things that you cherish are jeopardized, when the freedoms at stake are yours. By having students engage with the personal issues in their lives, we were able to compel them to think beyond just themselves and to look at the larger scope and these networks of mutuality. Civic learning then becomes personal, and it is also important that many times students don't know where to start. How can I do this? Who am I to make this change? And I remind them that the protesters and participants of the Arab Spring in Egypt in 18 days managed to come together using social media and whatever resources they had to oppose a powerful authoritarian regime. Did they have experience in this field? Not really. Did they have skills in organizing? Not particularly. Were they scared? Terrified for their lives? Absolutely. But did they have a goal, a passion, and a voice? Yes, and that's where they started. And again, we need to remind students that they have the skills and the potential to create change. They don't need fancy degrees. They don't need fancy credentials. They are a crucial component of our social fabric. From agency, we move to advocacy. Especially in this national election year, this is a crucial step. Students need to feel that they are part of our political system and that their vote is for their interest and for their country. I've been saddened to see many of my most civically engaged students express disenchantment with voting. Why does my vote matter? Who cares if I vote or not? And again, as a child of immigrants, my father always told me that we never forfeit our right to vote, our right. And remember that many of our students may come from countries where such a right doesn't even exist. And also remember that many of these students, because of these immigrant statuses, are deprived of this right in our own country. This attitude towards voting illustrates a dangerous disconnect. Our students need to be reminded how our democracy works and how their participation is crucial. And it goes beyond just showing up at the ballots and voting. Our students must hold their leaders accountable and make sure that they deliver on the promises they make. Our students must make their voices heard and not just shrug their shoulders and accept ineffectiveness. This process of identity, agency, and advocacy is one way to introduce civic engagement in the classroom. Kingsborough was awarded a 3-year Bridging Cultures grant that helped pave the way for faculty to introduce themes of community, democracy, and difference in their humanities classes and to experiment with different pedagogical tools. The grant provided faculty with a safe space to experiment and the administrative support to take these risks. These innovations were engaging, effective, and exciting for both the faculty and the students. Moving from these innovations, it has also prompted KCC to take many campus-wide initiatives to celebrate our diversity. We hold an annual Immigration Day, which had stemmed from the conversation about DACA students and undocumented students on our campus and allowing them the opportunity to know their rights and to give other students a deeper understanding of the stories of these undocumented students. And it became a conversation and a celebration that we all have an immigration story, whether it's our own personal story or the story of our parents, our grandparents, and from further generations. We also have a diversity symposium looking at the different ethnicities and backgrounds of our country and taking and tackling those uncomfortable conversations. It became very clear to us that stereotypes persist when we don't give our students the platform to ask questions and that safe space to have those conversations to gain a deeper understanding of these differences that we see every day. And coming up on November 14th, we'll hold our Citizenship Under Siege grant, where we're tackling interfaith engagement. So Kingsborough has long celebrated its ethnic diversities and their national diversities, but we have not grappled with the interfaith and the various religious diversities that exist on our campus. And we found it powerful to concentrate on the things that we have in common in our different religions rather than the things that we find divisive. This has led to a campus-wide initiative from our administration to move forward with plans for a student union and an intercultural center where, again, we will be encouraging students through curriculum, programming, and community engagement to engage with one another. And finally, the wonderful word that all administrators are buzzing about is retention. And of course, retention comes down to numbers, but what I have found to be most effective is that civic engagement and retention can go hand in hand, and we need to impress upon this when we are presenting civic engagement to the administration. Civic engagement is important in how it can help achieve the goals of retention. Civic engagement gives students a purpose, a reason to come to school, and a clear link to outside application. It makes their degrees and their courses more tangible. Using the humanities to make outside connections helps students to see how these courses can be useful and applied in the real world. Finally, in conclusion, it is crucial to remember and to embrace the beautiful diversity of our students and for them to be able to recognize themselves on our campuses, in our communities, and in our country to understand that they are capable of making actual change. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Helen, for sharing what's going on at Kingsborough. And I look forward to actually joining you on the 11th of this month for your Interfaith Forum, and I look forward to that. As we take a brief pause, just a brief pause, we invite you to write down any example in your family history or in your life when you resented newcomers that arrived after your family. What fears or sense of potential loss triggered those responses? Or how did the nation's response to that specific group differ from your family's own historic or contemporary experience? And feel free to list your answers in the chat box to the right of the screen. And while you're doing that, I'm going to introduce our next pair of presenters who are from, again, Middlesex Community College in Massachusetts. And we have heard that the college is located in a town that has a history of waves of new immigrants moving through it. We've heard about the Greek immigrants. But Donna and Matthew, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Verdis. So in the brief time that we have, we'd like to talk to you about some of the campus strategies that we've used to put a human face on the topic of immigration, resulting from the work that we've done in the Citizenship Under Siege grant. And so just to set the context a little bit, we are a two-campus institution. We have a suburban campus in Bedford, Massachusetts, just north of Boston, and we have an urban campus located in the city of Lowell, Mass. And across our entire service area, we're seeing a trend that the majority white population is decreasing and students of color are increasing. And so it's really important for us to put strategies in place that are going to engage all of our students and that our students are able to see themselves in our curriculum and at our college. And the topic of immigration is a really poignant one for us. And so this is just a slide that shows a picture of what some of our students look like.
And in fact, it's very representative of our student demographics because our student population is composed of over 80-plus nations. We have 500-plus Cambodian American students. As you may know, Lowell, Massachusetts is the second largest population of Cambodians outside of Cambodia. We just received an Advocacy grant, 5-year multi-million-dollar, that will connect the college and the community with the student success of our diverse population.
And so one of the activities that we've done was to hold a public forum, and we purposely went out off campus into the community and worked with a partner, the Lowell Historical National Park, and David Kalivas, who spoke earlier, as well as a number of others, spoke to a standing room only crowd, and we advertised this in the community. We went out to various ethnic groups and religious groups and community partners, and we worked with Dr. Christoph Strobel from the History Department at the University of Massachusetts in Lowell, but also we had a panel discussion that included Bopa Malone from a Cambodian Mutual Assistance Association, which is a community partner that helps new Cambodians, and Julia Gavin from the Coalition for a Better Acre. And the Acre is a fantastic neighborhood in downtown Lowell that has been the staging area for many new immigrant groups over waves and waves of immigrations, stemming all the way back to the foundation of the city when the original Irish canal diggers came to dig the canals at the early part of the American Industrial Revolution. And then later, as low-cost housing, it became a fantastic opportunity for new waves of immigrants from Europe, and then later from Latin America, and now from Africa and from other countries to come and join our community. And we had a really wonderful event, and what happened at that event was really what we were hoping for, which is that generations of immigrants were able to see common challenges and common struggles and also identify common needs. And so the more established groups spoke to the less established groups, and it was really an exciting afternoon or evening event.
And in fact, we can see this in particular from the student e-portfolios and from their reflections, which really show the robust connections across different generations of immigrants. And in fact, it became very apparent as we read these student reflections that they themselves saw that looking at the humanities, the students were able to realize the power of voice, that they really developed and saw the mutual support that's so necessary as they begin to help each other as immigrant communities, as they move, as David said, from the they to the we.
So another strategy that we implemented were this peer dialogue facilitator program, where we took students who were members of our community. As a community college, our students don't come in from other places. They live nearby all around, and we trained them using a modified version of our supplemental instruction tutor training to lead and facilitate dialogue. And so they worked with faculty members to design assignments, and through the peer dialogue facilitation, were able to implement a democratic pedagogy and really diffuse the power differential in a classroom and have the students themselves leading these discussions. And you can see on the slide there's a reflection from a student who was involved in a PDF-based activity in a classroom where the student had to do an interview with a person, a historical interview, but not with a big historical figure, someone in their own family, a personal history. And in this case, it was a Cambodian student who was unaware of the details of the Cambodian genocide and really learned a lot about her family history in the course of this activity, but also learned about the importance of knowing about different cultures, histories, when you're interacting. And that was a really powerful moment for us.
One of the other things that we've done in order to connect students across different communities and with the community itself was born from a vision project of Massachusetts, a one-credit revenue-generating course that can be bundled into a 3-credit gen ed, and it's run like a mini-conference. So we have, the keynotes, museum visits, the concurring sessions, the concerts, et cetera, an opportunity for community members, experts, academic experts, as well as our own faculty who have expertise in areas to go and present and to meet with the students, where students can listen, they can learn, they can engage with the community, with the experts, with the faculty, and with each other. And with these opportunities, we put people together in situations that maybe they don't normally have, and with conversations that they don't normally have as well. We have found that these types of interdisciplinary weekends, which each semester have a different theme, this one coming up actually tonight and tomorrow, and the next day on immigration, very timely, really empower the community. And we found that this kind of activity and this kind of engagement is really robust and we're really getting good results from our students and feedback. And in fact, part of this weekend is the Living Library.
Right, and so the Living Library is something new that we're trying. It's based on the human library model, although not associated with that particular program. And we have 10 Middlesex students, faculty, and staff who are immigrants themselves from various kinds of situations. So we have people from Latin America, people from the Middle East, people from Africa, people from Cambodia, and each is going to be available to be checked out like a book during the interdisciplinary weekend on immigration and have a one-on-one conversation with an individual. And we really feel like through this kind of one-on-one connection, people can put a human face on the experience of immigrating. People can contrast the experience of a refugee with a more traditional immigrant, and that we're really hoping to build the community connections and to show that we value the experiences of our students and our faculty and staff and how it all fits in to what our citizenry looks like in the Merrimack Valley in our service area.
And in fact, building on all of this is our Fulbright Hayes Group Study Abroad projects that we've had. This is representative of the third Fulbright Hayes that we've had, Cambodia's Cultural Heritage in a Modern World. And really the focus of this particular grant, of which I'm the director, is to really make connections between Cambodians' arts and culture and the traditions with the humanities, fine arts, social sciences, business. Because what we want to do then is to connect Cambodia's rich artistic heritage as a primary means of understanding Cambodian culture so that we can really reach out and foster resiliency and a strong self-concept among Cambodian youth and young adults in Lowell, which is a demographic that we feel we really want to connect with. And we want them to connect with their heritage. And so by appreciating the Cambodian classical and folk art forms among the general Lowell community, and developing support strategies for sustaining these traditions in the local region, our group at Middlesex Community College and the Lowell Public School teachers have really been able to engage the immigrant community, not only here in particular in Lowell, Massachusetts, but when we visited Cambodia this past summer, we were able to connect to not only the 2010 Fulbright project we had, also our National Endowment of the Arts National Heritage Fellow, Yari Levan, who is a master ceramist here in Lowell, was with us, and we were able to connect with the community and bring our in-country reflections back to the reality of this Lowell community. And we've been really working hard as we've talked about throughout this hour, the they becomes the we and the us. We've really tried through humanities and through sharing our cultural identities with different strategies to listen so that we can learn, so that we can engage, so that we can empower not only our own students, our own faculty, our own institutions, but our own communities and the warp and the woof of this powerful immigrant community that we have here in Lowell.
Oh, Donna and Matt, thank you so much. That was wonderful, and we're seeing a lot of themes emerging from all of this. And one of those themes is how race and racialization has been intertwined over history with questions of immigration and citizenship, even when applied to earlier white European immigrants, whether Black Irish, part of my heritage, or those swarthy Italians noted by their skin color and often kept out or admitted in at lower rates than Northern Europeans. And these kinds of intertwining continue to be, as we can see, as our community colleges in particular, but all of our institutions represent, I guess, 80 different nationalities in Middlesex, 142 at Kingsborough. Someone commented in the chat that when she thinks of the word immigrant, she answered and said 60% of our students. So we're turning, therefore, in our final discussion to the legacy from a group of Americans who did not choose to come here, but came in chains, beginning nearly 400 years ago. Santa Fe College in Florida opted to focus on race, citizenship, and that theme that's intertwined through all of these others, the theme of belonging, as they constructed their public programs. So, David Price, can you tell us how you tackled these still volatile subjects in ways that open people up rather than shutting them down?
Yes, thank you very much. I certainly hope to be able to do that. The focus of our session is how we used the techniques of the humanities to both move from confrontation to dialogue, perhaps in the words of some of the chat, move away from the toxicity that current debates about people of different cultures have in terms of how some of the mainstream culture is treating them, and to disrupt kind of the status quo thinking that people who are not quite friendly toward those of other cultures have. The techniques that we used, first off, were experiential. We did a simulation of the voting and registration process where students actually got to take on roles of people with different demographic and economic characteristics. Theater, we had a wonderful performance of a spoken word duet called Parallel Lives. And lastly, discussion, where we have dialogues with people who represent groups that have known and continuing antagonisms. The voting and registration simulation we hoped would show how different people, depending upon their race, gender, economic status, or some other factors, have difficulty exercising the right to vote in the same way. Participants were randomly assigned a character with different combinations of the above variables. Based on their assigned character, they encountered different obstacles to voting, and the graphic here is an example of some of the obstacles to voting that we were spreading out through the simulation. We structured the simulation so that only about 30% of participants actually were able to vote. After all the participants find out whether or not they're able to vote, we collectively bring them all together and debrief them about the experience and let them express how they felt about it. The image here is of our Constitution Day running of this simulation, where we had one period 5 classes and another period 4 classes all go through it, which actually got a little bit cumbersome when you have over 200 people trying to do this at one time. But it was also very enlightening to get that mass of students to actually experience this all at the same time. We also try to have some positivity to it by explaining remedies that there are to some of the obstacles to voting. And so that we get some good instructor buy-in, we try to tie the obstacles that we discussed to simulation back to academic scholarship on voter suppression. We also had, as part of our Citizenship Under Siege grant, a presentation by two scholars from the University of Florida that dealt with voter suppression. Students really reacted well to this simulation. They were often very surprised at how complicated the process of registering to vote and actually getting to the polls and voting is. And one of our main objectives was achieved in that many of them realized that these complications fall heaviest on the poorer populations, which tend to be disproportionately less educated and or people of color. Not having this ability to vote really affects how the political system responds to the less educated, to the poor, and to people of color. Some also realized they were going to have to make a lot more effort to vote than they thought they were going to, and we're certainly doing everything we can to make sure that they are able to get out and vote. Interestingly, one of the things I found, at least from my students who were in these simulations, is most students became very supportive of restoring the rights of felons to vote after their sentence has been served. As one of them very astutely noted, felons will also be affected by laws made by politicians, so prohibiting them from voting is unfair. I liked that particularly well because it meets in with a reading that they had not yet done on the justification of why democracy should exist. So that came from the Levelers and the Agreement of the People, if any of you are familiar with the English Civil War period. Our performance of Parallel Lives was really excellent, and it was very, very impactful among lots of different student populations. The play is I guess it's not really a play, it's more a spoken word duet by a journalist, Bill Maxwell, and a former professor of English at Vassar College, Beverly Coyle. Their original version covered their experiences growing up in segregated North Florida in the waning days of the Jim Crow system. They updated it for us to include their experiences in the 21st century traveling around the country. And it very much highlighted aspects of this mid-20th century racism and also sexism that persists down to the present day. And the one that I thought was most striking and that really made an impact of students was that consistently, as Maxwell and Coyle traveled around the country doing this play, a number of people assumed that Coyle was Maxwell's romantic partner because they could not really get that she would be his intellectual collaborator, which I think reflects some kind of deep-seated misogyny in parts of the country, which is largely the South, that they were traveling around in. Another really impactful event, but one that is very difficult to broaden out and scale, was our dialogues with the other. And we concentrated on police and students. This is a limited capacity event, unlike the others, which can, pretty much let the fire marshal set the number of people limit, where we get members of two groups with traditional antagonisms and have a moderated discussion with them to promote understanding. The ideal ratio for doing this is a 1-to-1 ratio between the two groups, and certainly no more than 2-to-1. And again, ideally, you would want multiple moderators depending upon the size, at least a minimum of 2 moderators. Our student dialogues with police have been 30 to 45 participants, and we have focused mainly on students versus police, especially students of color versus police. And we've used 3 to 4 moderators. The moderators need to be very well trained in conflict resolution so that they can kind of see a conflict potentially coming and kind of diffuse it. The groups start out by meeting separately and generate an A to Z list of adjectives to describe the other. They then come together and review their list. Fortunately, in Alachua County, Florida, we're lucky to have the River Phoenix Center, which facilitates these for us and has provided us some very trained moderators to make sure that everything stays on track. Here's some images of the dialogue. Here's a policeman going over the police list. Here's one of the students going over the student list of adjectives that students use to describe police. We also try to make sure that we have snacks or, ideally a meal so that there's a coming together in a very pleasant atmosphere. So they've all turned out very well, which sometimes when I discuss this surprises people. And people ask me why these dialogues don't generate into aggressive hostility, because you are having two groups of people that have long-standing antagonisms. I think one reason is that if you're going to participate in this kind of thing, you're self-selecting that you're going to do that. So I think that the people who are most hostile just aren't going to show up and do this kind of thing. Also, as I say, having highly skilled moderators is really, really important for this, to make sure that everybody is heard and that potential conflict is headed off. Also, we found that when people are in a public setting and the tone is calm, people aren't trying to, egg each other on, and they're literally facing, in kind of a across-the-room format, multiple people from another group, that tends to kind of make people a little bit less aggressive than they might otherwise be in a different context. Also, it's very telling when you see how others see you. And it really starts to make you think, especially when the way that one group sees another is very similar to how they see that group. Give you an example. We did one of these dialogues between faculty and police. And several adjectives that both groups use to describe the other basically boil down to feelings of entitlement. And we faculty were like, what? The police think we're entitled? I mean, they're the ones that walk into the store and grab the cup of coffee for free and walk out. How are we entitled? And the police, who had all been through college, or at least community college like we're at, gave lots of good reasons why faculty can sometimes be perceived as feeling entitled. So our hope overall is that this process stimulates reflection of the participants' views of the other and generates some level of understanding that can decrease the level of toxicity in our discourse on different cultures and how they should relate to hopefully form a more united country. That's it for me. Thanks.
And thank you, David. We have just a few moments for some questions, and I'm just going to answer one right away. Is that all of the and this webinar, including the two prior webinars, presentations, the resources, as well as the recordings, are available on the AAC and U's website as well as the TDC's website. And we're going to be sending an email with the links to everyone that has registered. And again, feel free to share with your colleagues. And we have just enough time for about 2 questions before we have to wrap up. And one comes kind of early on, and I believe this question was posed to Helen, and then we have a question from Middlesex, and then we'll wrap up. And I believe that the question to Helen is about what type of inclusion programs, inclusive programs, are you initiating on your campus, and how effective have they been? And Helen, if you can answer that quickly, that'll be great. And also, all of our presenters are going to be available if you would like to email them personally as well.
Yep, sure. Thank you, Verdis, and thanks for the question. And my other colleagues on the call have also shared some excellent initiatives that they have put into practice in terms of inclusion. I had touched on the importance of breaking through the stereotypes that we hold through giving the opportunity for dialogue. And the example of the living library that was given earlier as well is a great way of doing that. And also David's last example just now of having these dialogues and why they aren't hostile, they have to be moderated. And I know that sometimes that's something that we fear. We want to have an open dialogue. This is the space for it on our community college and our college campuses, but we're scared of how it could easily get out of control when there are so many passions and so many long-held beliefs and opinions. So having the importance of it being moderated is very important. However, we also think it's important to train our faculty to address these things because our students are comfortable having these conversations. They want to know, they want to share, they want to ask these questions. So also in part of our Citizenship Under Siege programming, we had a faculty workshop for our faculty in terms of difficult dialogues and how to have them in the college classroom. So these are steps to make sure that, yes, we can have these conversations, but it's also important that the environment is primed for effective and respectful exchange and dialogue. So that's a step towards inclusion, in my opinion, just giving them the environment and the space to speak freely and ask their questions and have their voices heard. And we like to give students the center stage in all of our programming, whether it's on diversity or immigration or interfaith. We want to give students the platform to share. So we have open mics, we have student panels, so they're at front and center in having this dialogue and making it vocal on campus.
All right, thank you, Helen.
Sure.
And unfortunately, our time is up, and I'm going to yield the floor to Karen to sum up what we have been through, this little journey that you've been with us for an hour, and to thank you for joining and participating. And feel free to, there'll be contact information to chat us up, email us, and we'll respond, and look out for the email from me that will have the links to all the information in this webinar. So, Karen, the floor is yours.
Well, let me just begin by thanking so much the experts who've offered what they have done on their campuses, and all of you listening who are clearly doing things on your own campuses. I hope that you'll deploy some of the approaches you learned about today but might not yet have tried. So we're going to end this webinar with this provocative pair of three moments in history, two pictures but three moments. The first was the installing of Bartholdi's Statue of Liberty in 1886 strategically in the harbor of New York City, which became a beacon of hope to immigrants pouring into the U.S. from Europe in that period. The second, on the right, is the signing of the Immigration Reform Act of 1965 done at the foot of that iconic statue. And that new legislation opened up U.S. borders to include people from the global south and Asia in larger numbers than ever before. And then to the left is a contemporary cartoon by a Latino artist suggesting that Lady Liberty is now on the run. Mm. In Emma Lazarus' poem, Lady Liberty is also called Mother of Exiles and described as lighting the way for homeless and tempest-tossed. We seem to be in a very different moment, and I was struck by the association so many of you offered, which were almost all negative, which says something about the moment we are in and how far we've come from a very different view of immigrants. So how do we better understand what's put Lady Liberty on the run once again? And are we really ready now to limit the we, and we the people are they, actually us, as David Kalivas argues. We hope that you won't shy away from these tough questions, but use the humanities and other means to offer ever more constructive ways to engage with these critical, and as you could hear in people's voices, and as we could see in your text, deeply personal, but also political, economic, and social questions, whether you do it in classes, on your campuses, or within your larger community. So we're really joining with you and relying on you to be part of what cultivates a democratic culture of listening, of learning, of engagement, and coming through that to some point in which the common good really means all of us. So I want to thank you very much for all you've already done and all that you will do. On behalf of AAC&U and TDC, goodbye.